Welcome to Substack Live. This is Jon Fleischman with So Does It Matter. And if you're here, that means you're a subscriber and you already know what I'm doing here. We talk about all California politics all of the time. For those of you who haven't figured out how this works on a Substack Live, there's some group of you. Usually we have 100 or 200 people that sift in and out of these Substack Live discussions when they're happening. And then we go ahead and post it up afterwards as a video for people to watch at their own convenience. And I was just looking at the numbers on the one I did a couple of weeks ago, and ended up getting about 2,500 different people that decided to watch the video between live and after the fact. So as long as that many people want to spend some time hearing what I have to say, I guess I'll keep saying. So we'll just kind of keep at it. So with that having been said, I promised that this would be my opportunity to weigh in on the debate last night. First of all, before I do anything, let's make sure people can hear me. Maybe hit the heart button, just a couple of you, and then I'll know that somebody can hear what I'm saying. Maybe, come on, hit the heart button. One heart from somebody. CD, give me a heart. There we go. All right, I got some heart buttons. All right, so we'll get going. So last night we had the way that it was framed, of course, by the media that was setting up the debate is after the huge meltdown of Eric Swalwell in spectacular style. This was the debate to reboot a otherwise, frankly, pretty moribund gubernatorial campaign. I've talked to many people, family members, in addition to other people who have not really even been engaged and haven't seen all of the candidates and haven't been paying too much attention. So I think part of this has to do with the fact that there's a lot of cynicism on the part of voters. But another part of it has to do with the fact that this field of candidates, well, first of all, because it's a pretty blue state, you're really looking for candidates of quality that are going to emerge on the Democrat side to kind of shape the discussion. And frankly, the two most high-profile Democrats that could have run in the gubernatorial race took a flyer on it. Former Vice President Kamala Harris looked at it for a split second, and I think she probably realized there was an awful lot of work involved with being governor of California. And also, she's kind of been president, at least by autopen. And so to take a drop back and run for the state house to be the governor of the state after you've been the vice president, run for president is, I think, pretty hard thing to do, at least for her. So she took a pass. And then I think the other Democrat that really would have boxed out the field pretty easily or pretty well would have been a United States Senator Alex Padilla, who for a hot moment was apparently looking at it and talking about it. And he ultimately came out and made a statement that he'd much rather be in the U.S. Senate than be governor of California. And so when those two people took a pass, you were really setting the table for a bunch of B-level actors to engage. Maybe I'll give a B+ to another actor who didn't engage, and that was the Attorney General, Rob Bonta, who I think is a very problematic person and has some significant issues. But sitting as the current Attorney General of the state with a whole lot of anti-Trump credentials because he sues Donald Trump every day when he wakes up and gets out of bed, I think he would have presented a pretty formidable candidate and would have been a front runner that would have needed to been brought down. None of those people ran. And so because none of those people ran, we got this very, as I call it, mediocre field of Democrats running. And I think that has led to a low-key race. Also, at the same time, you've got the incumbent governor who, by the way, I don't think cares much for being governor anymore. His exclusive focus seems to be on getting to the Oval Office. As a matter of fact, I was just reading in the California Post where you should definitely be going because I write regularly there. I've had 19 columns there since they've opened in February. Although you're a subscriber to my Substack when I write there, I also share them with you by subscription to Substack, so you get to see that stuff. But anyways, I think that let's just go ahead and jump into this debate. I'm busy trying to frame the debate by saying that the first thing that's the most significant about the debate is that the field of Democrats is really boring. And so because it's really boring, it hasn't caught much attention. And that's why you see so many undecided voters as we sit here and a fluid and a race that has no, it's not set. And ballots are going to be going out in like less than 2 weeks. I think it is maybe about 2 weeks from now, ballots are going out and still we don't really know what's going on. At some point a few weeks ago, there was a coalition coalescence. There was a coalescence behind Swalwell by some of the very big public employee union players, the California Teachers Association, Service Employees International Union, California Labor Federation. They endorsed a few candidates, but notably Swalwell. You had a bunch of, Adam Schiff got behind him, big chunk of the House delegation. All these people got behind him because I think at some point they're like, this shit's crazy. And we keep seeing more and more stories about how possibly two Republicans will take the first two spots. And so, what ends up happening is they get behind Swalwell, not, I think, because he was impressive, but because I think they thought they could control him. One of the things the unions especially like are these office holders that don't have a lot of personal means, because that means that the shadowy nonprofits that they financially support can hire people a la Jennifer Siebel Newsom and others. Anyways, so he flames out and we're left where we are now. And now that gets to the debate of yesterday. The first thing I'm going to tell you is it'll be very interesting to see the numbers, because I suspect that not very many people were watching the debate last night. I mean, you all probably were, or most of you, politically engaged people, but that's a small and shrinking percentage of the electorate, of the people actually paying attention. I think that the more divisive politics becomes, the more partisan's the wrong word. The more extreme would be a better word. The more extreme politics becomes, there's a growing group of people that are paying less and less attention to politics. And so I think the first thing that we have to acknowledge is I'm not sure how many people were watching the debate. And then my first takeaway from the debate, see, it only took me about 8 minutes to get to a takeaway from the debate, is that I thought it was sleepy. I thought that it was, I don't want to call it a nothing burger, which I've seen some analysts call it. Nothing moved the needle in this debate. Nothing happened in this debate that was an aha moment that would have caused oh my God, somebody blew it. Or, oh my God, somebody had the world's most amazing debate. And that, somehow changes what we're looking at. I would call it a status quo debate. In honor of all of you who don't think I'm getting any older, I'm putting on my glasses because I've got some notes here and I want to be able to read them. So status quo debate, we mentioned that. My biggest critique is that I think that we needed an evening to hear from these candidates about what they would actually do as governor to solve the problems facing the state of California. And we did not get that. That was not the debate format, the questions that were asked. I mean, with all due respect, devoting 5 minutes of a debate to what do you think about people being pulled over by the CHP to demonstrate their proficiency and understanding English road signs, that was a nice 5-minute diversion, but that could have been 5 minutes of what do you want to do about the housing crisis? What do you want to do about the homeless crisis? What do you want to do about the structural budget imbalance in California? What do you want to do about, the massive problems we have in education in California? My friend Dan Walters of many, many years, friend, acquaintance, he's a long time, I actually call him the dean of center right writing on California politics. He's over at Cal Matters. He made the observation that we didn't hear from core issues like housing shortage, homelessness, poverty, water, utility costs, weak academic achievement, chronic budget deficits. So I'm going to give the debate itself an F, because the debate didn't do what I think it needed to do, which was really start to dig into some issues. Now, I recognize you got 8 people on a stage. It's really hard to do that and to get into much substance. That having been said, I think the best way to approach kind of going into this debate and a real analysis of the debate is to talk about the actual individual people on the stage, what they were doing right, what they were doing wrong. So let's start with the Republican frame, right? So, and I should back up. There's really nothing that I like about the top two system. I think that this is the system that was passed in 2010 through Prop 14, which it changed the system. It used to be that there'd be primaries. So all the Republicans would run amongst each other and one would end up in the general election, all the Democrats in one. But frankly, every other political party, whether it's the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Independent Party, American Independent Party, all the parties would have their candidate on a general election ballot. I thought that was a good plan because it meant that in November you had some real choice on the ballot between people. And understand with political parties, that's how people try to group together and have conversations with like-minded people and put somebody forward. So we scrapped that. We went to this top two system. And I think what ends up happening is gamesmanship happens, and not the least of which would be, somebody getting blocked out, because two people from one party went. And by the way, that happened in 2014. I think it was 2014. Then Attorney General Kamala Harris was running for U.S. Senate. and her general election opponent, hold on a minute, I have ran into this before where I don't touch my screen for a while. The general election opponent was Democratic Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez. And so you had a choice between Democrat A and Democrat B to go to the U.S. Senate. Now, California is pretty Democrat, so I think one of them was going to win anyway, but you really didn't have any choice. So this stuff happens. All this to say, the one thing that I've seen so far that I like about Prop 14 is I love the fact that we had everybody on the same stage at the same time, because it's the only time you get to hear Democrats having to deal with Republicans on the same stage as them. Mark my words, when we go into the fall, if you have one Republican and one Democrat, that Democrat is going to agree to 1, 2 debates, and only that because they're getting kind of pushed into it. As a matter of fact, right now is the time to talk about issues, because if we get into the fall, into a debate, into a runoff between a Democrat and a Republican, we're simply going to see the Prop 50 strategy of last November, the redistricting measure that wasn't really about redistricting. It was, do you want to send a message to Donald Trump from a state that Kamala Harris won by 20 points? So you knew what the message was going to be, and no one should have been shocked or surprised that Prop 50 passed more or less on the same margins of victory as Kamala Harris. So you had that going on. So I say all of that because it was fun to have the Republicans on this stage. And as everybody knows here, I'm a conservative myself, but sometimes I don't always fit in well with my own folks because I call balls and strikes. So I have no problem saying when somebody did right or somebody did wrong. And, on my website, on this Substack, every Friday, I produce winners and losers of the week. I do a worst week in California politics. Last week, it was Eric Swalwell, who won it magnificently. But the week before that, it was Sheriff Bianco, not because I think he's a loser. I like Sheriff Bianco. I think he'd be a great governor, but because he lost that week, because that was the week where Steve Hilton was endorsed by the president, which was a pretty big deal. And I felt objectively that's a week that sucks. And so you can have the worst week, as they call it, in California politics without being a loser. It's not meant to be a pejorative to the person. It's more like who had a bad week. Anyways, I thought that they had the simplest, cleanest message of the night, because both of them together, individually, we're done with Democrat rule in California. And I thought they both telegraphed that. I thought that if you were looking at the one thing that surprised me, but I think in a positive way, is if you had been at the California Republican convention just a week and a half ago, you would have seen a lot of tension and a lot of sparks and a lot of pushing back between Hilton and Bianco, not just their supporters, but from themselves. It was a Donnybrook. You go into this debate and you had to wonder, were they going to go after each other? And that most notably did not happen. The time that they had, they used, and they went after their Democratic opponents. I will say that as far as debate formats go, I think that this format was better suited for Bianco's style than Steve Hilton's style. Hilton, I think of him, and I've gotten to know him pretty well. So I think of him as he's a policy wonk, right? He's really dug into the weeds. He can really get into a lot of details on the policies that he would like to pursue. He's a naturally curious person. He's a naturally intellectual person. And so he's got policy chops that he brings to the table, but you're not able to demonstrate really your policy chops in a debate where you've got 60 seconds to respond to a question, which doesn't mean that the seasoned Fox News host wasn't adroit when he was talking, but it meant that his A game wasn't able to come forward in a debate this way. Whereas if it was like every candidate, you each have 3 minutes to talk about what you're going to do on housing or what you're going to do on education or what you're going to do on homelessness. Bianco, I think, was very much advantaged in this format because, he's kind of the populist guy with, I won't say one-liners, but he's got a kind of a very simple, straightforward, approach. He's looking in the camera and he's making his statement and he's being kind of very plain spoken. And I think that served him well. He needed for him to do well in this debate, he needed to really kind of establish his bona fides. And I think he did that. So I think he did what he needed to do, but he didn't have a shining moment where everyone, wow, he was the winner. And then I thought Hilton, again, there was no breakout moment for Hilton, but two things did happen in this debate that I think really advantaged Hilton. One of them was Hilton's, he's in his element when I call it shadow boxing, right? His ability to get in the retort, his ability to jab at an opponent, his ability to know how to use that extra 3 to 5 seconds while the hosts are saying, Mr. Hilton, but he knows that in that moment it's drama. He keeps going. There's a little bit of tension, and he's taking that last shot. I think he did that a few times, especially as we'll talk about the Katie Porter and all this thing about giving grades to Gavin Newsom. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I thought Hilton did good. And then there were some moments for him to shine on some of his policy stuff, as like when he was asked what he was going to specifically do on a couple of items, he was able to kind of cite very specific, detailed items, especially when he was asked how he was going to get basically conservative policy moved forward when the Democrats would have a supermajority in the legislature, and he was able to articulate how a lot of these changes can happen just from the executive branch. So again, I think that neither Bianco nor Hilton slipped. Both of them did good. Neither of them had a breakout moment. But the thing that, of course, helped Hilton in the debate was the mention, and it came from the debate moderators, one of them, that he's been endorsed by the president. And while President Trump's positives, even amongst Republicans, are dropping, the latest survey shows that Trump is now dropped into the high 60s with Republicans. I think there's a lot of frustration, especially with the lack of clarity about what's going on in Iran, coupled with gas prices. Affordability is a huge issue right now. So even with that, the Trump endorsement is going to be very key to Hilton. And the more that it's mentioned, the more it reminds everybody of the unique challenge he would have in November, but the more it will help him to consolidate and lift up his vote for the June election. And it's worth noting that, Bianco has raised millions of dollars. I want to say six. Ted Hilton just put out a thing today where he's now raised 10. I do think that he has spent more money. I wouldn't be surprised if both he and Bianco have kind of a similar amount of money to spend going forward. And it'll be interesting to see how they choose. It's kind of I was talking earlier with a friend, and we were deciding that it would be an interesting assignment to give a class of master's students in political science. Okay, you're running for governor of California. To run a full-throated, robust campaign, you would need $80 million. You only have 3. What do you actually do with the $3 million you have? So that's where they're facing. So let's talk about the Democrats. And again, the Democrat problem is that they were really debating who should manage the status quo. There was really nobody running who was critical of how the state is being run right now. And I understand why you'd want to do that as a partisan. The state is currently being run by Democrats. And of course, looming out there is the fact that while Newsom, his popularity has dropped, he's still very popular amongst Democrats, and nobody wants to draw the governor's opposition. And I assume some people are hopeful that they will get the governor's support. But as it's been mentioned by a few people, Ashley Zavala, who's the political reporter and state capitol reporter for KCRA TV in Sacramento, is fond of asking people to rate the governor and give him a letter grade. That's like her shtick. It's one of the things that she does, and it's great because it really forces the person she's interviewing to give a very subjective response about the governor. So somehow we got into letter grades on this debate, and it was embarrassing. I mean, I'll start with, we're going to come back to Matt Mahan, but I'll start with Mahan because Mahan, up until the time that he decided to announce his run for governor formally, I mean, he was very, very critical about Newsom, extremely so, to the point where it was obvious that Gavin Newsom has distaste for Mahan because of it. And even Mahan, basically said he'd give the governor good grades on this, give the governor good grades on that. One of my favorite moments of the debate was when Katie Porter gave Gavin Newsom a B, which means very good on a report card, to Gavin Newsom on the issue of homelessness. If there's any issue of the state of California where an objective review of where we are, where we were, the money that's been spent, the outcomes, who's getting rich off of it, what the fraud is, whatever metric you want to use, homelessness as an issue in California for Democrats has been a big flat F. But somehow Katie Porter, who announces, I'm a tough grader in my classes, because, she's a law school student. Hold on a minute. My screen went dark again. Sorry. So a minute. All right. So Katie Porter says, I'm a tough grader, but I'd give him a B. And boy, Steve Hilton was right there to get in her face. Basically, I'd like to take your classes. It was a pretty funny moment. Anyway, so all this, I guess I'm making the observation that nobody in this field was willing to say there's things being done wrong in Sacramento right now that need to be changed. It was largely a group of Democrats that were sending the message that if you elect us, we are the status quo party. Mahan, a little bit, and we'll talk about him, was off that message just a little bit. But let's talk about Xavier Becerra. Again, Xavier Becerra is the former Director of Health and Human Services for the United States of America under President Barack Obama. He's a former member of Congress, former California State Attorney General, and he was rising in some polls in the days leading up to this debate. I'm not really sure of the efficacy of all of that, and that's another conversation we can have. But this is somebody who wanted to look like he was the adult in the room, right? And make the case that the governor's office was no place for on the job training. And frankly, I think that he didn't really shine at all. I think that to the extent maybe oatmeal might be the expression. He really was not inspiring. So thanks, bros. He was not inspiring. So I don't think he lost the debate, but to the extent that he was trying to get some momentum and keep it going, I don't know that anybody who was watching this debate was inspired by Xavier Becerra. So take that for what it is. Katie Porter, I thought missed her opportunity. So Katie Porter, I went into this debate thinking, you know what she's going to do? She's not going to have her famous whiteboard, right? Where she can write down all these critiques of CEOs, but she's on a debate stage where she's been locked in middle double digits with a billionaire, former hedge fund manager and owner, whatever, who's invested in fossil fuels and private prisons and all these things. I expected Katie Porter, regardless of the rails put on by the moderators, to be in his junk, to really go after him and really try to set herself to figure out how to get out of her cap, because that's where she is. I think a lot of people have an impression of her. And I'll tell you, if you're one of the 13% or so of Democrats, I assume they're all Democrats, that are supporting Katie Porter, you are not moving. You love what she's selling. She is your hero. Maybe you're one of her tens of thousands of contributors on Act Blue, but she's had a hard time breaking any higher. And she did not do anything in this debate that would cause her to bust that ceiling and move up higher. Again, status quo debate. She just didn't. She was on the defensive on the question about her treatment of her former aides. She got into it with Becerra, and I don't think that worked out well for her. Tom Steyer. So if you had to force me to actually say, okay, Jon, we get it. You think this debate had a lot of mediocrity to it. If you had to say somebody won, if somebody had to win, if you had to say somebody won the debate, Tom Steyer won the debate. And the reason he won the debate wasn't because of what he did do, but because of what nobody else did. Tom Steyer, I think, went into this debate as the Democrat frontrunner. And I don't think anything happened to change the status quo. Now, I use the word frontrunner very loosely because he's not that far ahead. And I also think he has a ceiling problem. I do think there's some interesting hypocrisy out there. Rose, I just hit my space bar, so we're going to be good for another 5 minutes. I think there's some hypocrisy out there about how the Democrats have decided to be the party that's anti-billionaire. I mean, they're supporting a statewide wealth tax on billionaires in California. Bernie's got and Ro Khanna have a billionaire wealth tax in Washington, D.C. In San Francisco, they're running a billionaire tax. All that going on. And all of these unions are attacking the billionaires. And yet he is a billionaire running with union support. So there's some hypocrisy in the system there somewhere. I thought that his low point of the debate came when one of the moderators actually asked him, hey, look, you've called for wealthy people to pay more in taxes. And she basically said, there's nothing that keeps you from paying more right now. Are you paying more? And it caught him on his heels, the heels of his white Nike tennis shoes that he wears. I don't know. Is that a thing? Like, I'm a billionaire, but I'm a humble person, so I wear Nikes? Or is it I'm a billionaire, so I don't have to follow the decorum rules of your average people? Anyways, he really got caught on his heels. It was like, I think that we need systematic changes and that a lot of wealthier people need to pay, but he really looked very weak in the answer to that question. Steyer did not fumble. He did not fall. And I actually found him to be slightly less, one of my observations about him is that he always seems like his pulse is like 120 and his cheeks are always very puffy and he's very hyperbolic. And I did think that toned down a little bit for this debate. That helps him. But again, if I was telling him, and I did tell him, I guess if he watched my commentary yesterday, he really needed to demonstrate a knowledge and an understanding of how Sacramento works and what he would do to show that he's not just the hyperbolic guy, but he's actually got some plans. He didn't do that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the debate format did not lend itself to being able to do that. So that's my take on Tom Steyer. Let's talk about Matt Mahan. So Matt Mahan, I've talked about this before. This is a guy who's suffering from an image problem. And when I say image, not like he's got a bad image. If you were to open up the dictionary to the words Matt Mahan, you'd literally see like a bowl of vanilla pudding there. He is a smart guy. He's a capable guy. He is not very exciting. He is not very invigorating. He is not very inspirational. I think he views himself as more of a technocrat than he does a politician. And he's also not somebody who is very interested in playing up to the party base, except we are in the most, I would call, extreme partisan and high rhetoric times that we've ever been in politics. And given how upset Democrats are with Donald Trump, it really is difficult to be the guy who's going to be like, I've got common sense solutions, and we can't blame all of our problems here in California on Donald Trump. We have to acknowledge that while all the things we want to do are smart and good, we want to go after climate, reductions in climate. We want to, solve the housing problem. We want to provide health care for everybody. We want to build high speed rail, but we're not doing it right. That's a very tough lane to be in. I thought that as debates go, this was his first time on a debate stage and his first time for whichever significant subgroup of people were watching this debate. I thought he, amongst the Democrats, he held his own. I thought it was very interesting. I thought my favorite moment, of course, was again, the master of disaster, Steve Hilton, coming in and scoffing at him as he kept using San Jose as like this prototypical example of we did it here, we could do it anywhere. And of course, Hilton was ready to talk about how San Jose was rated as like the most expensive city in the world to get housing. So anyway, I think Mahan, and I saw some post debate. You know how I guess on TV they take quick feels from people. I don't know how their methodology or how they do that. Mahan seemed to do pretty well there, but I think some of that may have been more about him being undefined and coming in to define himself. But I don't know how he gets into, at the end of the day, the Democrat that goes to the runoff is going to have to get into the middle high 20 percentiles. And that's a big doubling of support from where some of them are now. And for Mahan, it's like a quadrupling of support. Can he get there? All I know is that ballots are going to drop and people are going to start voting in a couple of weeks. And the more the votes get locked in, the harder it is to kind of move the ultimate outcome. So we'll see what happens. He's trying to be I put down here, he's trying to be a manager more than an ideologue. And we'll see if that flavor of ice cream is what if anybody's eating. So, all right. So we'll talk a little bit more about Steve Hilton. I talked about he and Bianco together. I thought he was the most disciplined messenger of everybody up there. I thought that he was in command of what he had to say, but there was not a breakout moment, but kind of like I said, Steyer is the putative frontrunner amongst Democrats. Hilton's the putative frontrunner between he and Bianco. So he needed to win this debate by making sure Republicans who were watching knew he'd been endorsed by Trump. Check the box. And he needed to perform well enough that he wouldn't lose any of his support. And no, so I thought he did what he needed to do um, in the debate. Unco, again, this format really advantaged his style of populism, the kind of we're not going to take the bullshit kind of a populism. And so I think he did well, and I think he did a good job stressing his law enforcement credentials. So I think they both did a fine job. Again, this debate didn't, and maybe I've said this like 15 times, this debate did not create a breakout moment for anybody, including them. So, the last Reuters survey before this was Hilton at 17%, Bianco at 14, Steyer at 14, Becerra at 10, Porter at 10, Mahan at 5, with 23% undecided. I'm not sure how many undecided people decided on a candidate after watching this debate tonight. I think that this is going to keep going. There are more debates coming, and I hope that as these debates get even closer to election day, that we see a debate format that allows the candidates more time to speak. I'd rather have had half the questions and more substantive answers than this kind of short zip, 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 zip. And I don't know how you win on the field anymore up on the stage. I suspect we're going to be stuck with these 8 people the whole way through. And I think we didn't talk about former mayor and former speaker Antonio Villaraigosa. We didn't talk about the dimmest light bulb of the bunch, Tony Thurman, who is the state superintendent of public instruction / bitch of the California Teachers Association. But it's not really surprising that those folks have not taken off. Frankly, I'm surprised that Becerra is up on the stage. I still can't quite figure out how he got there. and whether or not it's real or not. So I think that's what I got on the debate. I would, if I was going to give kind of like one wrap up on the debate, I would say that it was blurry, right? It didn't cause the field to really solidify in any given way. So status quo keeps going. Rusty Hicks, the chairman of the state Democrat Party, can continue his every other week polls, alarmed that the two Republicans are very close to being in the top two. Those of you who have tuned in before have heard me say I think it's a very unlikely outcome that we actually get the top two. I do think that once Hilton communicates to likely Republican voters his Trump endorsement, you're going to see him pick up as many as 10 points. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. I do think that the sheriff's lane is going to be to use his law enforcement credential, and really he and Mahan, they're going to be trying their hardest to reach into the moderate lane, into the independent lane. Anyways, we'll see what happens. So I'm going to pivot, if it's all right with everybody here. I mentioned that I was going to talk about the fact that this week, two ballot measures that had signatures turned in, they each turned in enough signatures and they got qualified this week. And I want to take a minute to talk about the two of them. I'm going to try to do it pretty quick because I ranted on for an awfully long time about the debate. The first is the Save Prop 13 ballot measure. I would say this is a conservative. You spend most of your time in California on defense. In California, not only do the bad guys have the football, but every day, especially if you take this analogy to the state legislature, every day you go on the field and they have twice as many players as you. That doesn't even make for entertaining, let alone competitive football. But we do have this mechanism called direct democracy in California, and there are two measures. One is now certified for the ballot. The other one, certification, is, I think, imminent. One of them is the Save Prop 13 ballot measure, which I'm about to talk about. The other one is the California voter ID ballot measure, which we'll talk about that a little more when it formally qualifies for the ballot. So Save Prop 13, I've written about it. I wrote about it earlier this week, and that's a measure that's designed to do two things specifically. And I'll get a little wonky, but I'll do it quick. The first thing that it's designed to do is, right now, if you do a tax increase measure at the local level, Prop 13 was written to require a 2/3 vote to get that done. But there have been court rulings. The courts over the years punch holes in Prop 13. So there's actually been a couple of ballot measures passed statewide to patch the holes that they have created, I should say. And so one of the holes that's been created is there was a decision that's called the Upland decision because it came out of Upland. And somehow the twisted logic of the court system is that if politicians put a tax increase on the ballot, it requires a 2/3 vote. But somehow, if it's put on by a citizen initiated ballot measure, at least at the local level, that only requires a majority vote. So what you're seeing more and more is a situation where it's usually the public employee unions in a city, they want more revenue because they want more raises. And so they'd go and squeeze the city councils, or if their school unions, squeeze the school boards to put tax increases on the ballot. Well, those all, were requiring a 2/3 vote. But now they have found out that if they simply go out and spend, depending on their jurisdiction, it could be $10,000 or $100,000, to go out and gather signatures and submit it to the city, then that only requires a majority vote to pass. Anybody who can do math will know that there's a big difference between trying to get a majority vote for a tax increase versus a 2/3 vote for a tax increase. And I could go into all of the philosophy behind the 2/3 vote and what we call the tyranny of the majority. And if you go look at the way that the Roman Empire ultimately collapsed, you get into a situation, which is why safeguards exist, where as soon as a majority of voters or majority of any body figures out they can use their votes to take things away from the minority, they bar the doors. And so there's these protections to make sure that just because someone has a majority doesn't mean they can basically commit legal plunder and use the laws and twist the laws to really rape and pillage the minority. So that's one thing this measure does. And the other thing that this measure does, which I think is equally as important, is for those of you who are not familiar with real estate transfer taxes, fees, right? These have always existed, but they've always been kind of like document fees. It's a few $100s. You sell a house and it's one of those little annoying things where you go, oh God, I owe $80 for that. Okay. But somehow somebody figured out that you could blow the doors off of real estate transfer fees. And why do it for $800 when you could do it for $8,000, right? And so these have become prolific. The poster child for this is the ULA measure in Los Angeles, which now says that if there's a piece of property in Los Angeles that's worth, I think, $5 million, when it transfers ownership, a 5% fee is applied on the total value of the property. So let's give you an example. You own an apartment building. It's worth over $5 million. You sell the building, or even better yet, you buy it for $10 million once upon a time. You take a loss and sell it for $5,100,000. You then have to give the city of Los Angeles 5% of $5.1 million, which is almost hundreds of thousands of dollars, simply by transferring the property. That's the most egregious example. But all of this stuff trickles down, because guess what happens? If you have to spend all that money when you're buying an apartment building from somebody, you're going to have to make that up somehow. How do you think you do it? Oh, I don't know. You have to raise the rent in order to rent the property for enough money to pay what is now a larger debt that you have from having to have borrowed more money. Anyways, this closes that. And not only does it close it, but it goes back a period of time, including this deal in Los Angeles, and says at the next general election, you have to pass it, and you got to pass it by a 2/3 vote. So that's what this does. It's made the ballot. We go on offense. Very excited about it. So the other item, and actually, when you're done watching this, if you go to your inbox, my afternoon commentary today that went out at 1:30 is all about this. The other measure that qualified on the ballot to go on the ballot this week, and it's a $25 billion housing bond ballot. And so this is a very familiar thing that happens with Democrats, with the majority party here, right? I would call it a scam, actually. So the politicians create problems in this state. This is now generic. They create problems, and then when their problems, they create regulations, they create fees, they create taxes, which create problems. And then they try to solve the problems that are created by their regulations by passing more taxes and fees and regulations. So in this particular instance, and we don't have time to go into a discussion about what's creating scarcity of housing in California, but I'll give you a hint. It's a whole lot of government intervention, right? The costs and the regulations from the state level to the local level are making it so much more expensive to create housing inventory in California that it's nuts. But here's the bright idea that the Democrats have come up with now, and they're partnered, surprisingly, with the California Realtors Association, which they may be good at selling houses, but they're ideologically challenged. This is not a group that is bounded by, we think there should be a limited role for government and society. It's what can come out of Sacramento that will help our members sell more houses, right? So obviously they're good on housing policy. They want to change housing policy, but now they got this pig of a project. And what it does is it takes government-backed bond money, $25 billion if it's approved by the voters, and gives that money away, or I should say loans that money away to certain buyers. Those buyers are chosen by the government. So again, the government is picking winners and losers. And the idea is that they will pay most of the cost of a traditional down payment with that money. So if you're lucky enough, my cousin Brian's watching, if Brian is lucky enough, hint, Brian, you're not, you make too much money. But if you're lucky enough to not be lucky enough to not make enough money, and you fill into this category, then what happens is the government will come in, and you normally would want to put down 20% on a home loan. That's to get advantageous loan rates, also to avoid insurance that you'd have to pay. The government of that call it a 20% piece of the pie. The expectation would be you would put down 3% of the 3%. You get what I mean. And the other 17% of the 20% would be paid for with by money from this bond, with an understanding that the homeowner would pay it back over time. Boy, this is a dumb idea. First and foremost, it does not fix the actual problem, which is lack of housing supply. It leaves in place the regulations, the delays, the lawsuits, the fees, and the restrictions that have made housing harder to build. And then in a market with too few homes, what you get is more competition for the remaining homes. And so the irony is this policy will drive up housing prices because there's a limited supply, and you're going to increase the demand. So you're actually going to drive up housing prices. And then, it's a giant debt funded government program sold by the same people who helped create the crisis, picks winners and losers, and it gives politicians an excuse to avoid the real, problem. But Rose, they do not take equity in the house, which is good. We do not want people taking equity in a house. But here's what happens, because what the proponents are trying to tell you is this isn't a traditional bond. In a traditional bond, the state of California has to repay the bonds from the state general fund. And so it's truly the state's borrowing money and the state taxpayers have to pay it back. Their argument is, no. This is a revenue bond. What we're doing is we're using the full faith and credit of the state of California to kind of back up these selling of bonds, but they're going to be paid back by the people who took the loans as they buy their house. But let's not be fooled by that. If things go bad, which shockingly, if somebody can only afford 3% of their down payment, should they be buying a house? But let's assume things go bad and they're not able to keep making their payments. The state of California or the bond fund doesn't sit as the primary lien holder. It's the bank for the big loan gets repaid first. So somebody walks away, they sell the house, I guess, and then the first amount of money goes to make the bank whole. And if there's any money left, it makes this fund whole. And you don't have to guess what's going to happen if this fund runs short and isn't able to help people anymore. They're going to dip right into the general fund to make up the difference. It's going to be horrible. Anyway, we don't need another housing bond. We needed to make it possible to build housing again. I can tell you, I don't know where the California Democratic Party is going to land. I can guess, unfortunately. I can tell you that a week and a half ago, the state Republican Party didn't just oppose this measure. It was a unanimous vote of over 1,000 delegates on the floor. Like there was not a single objection to opposing this measure from any delegate anywhere on the floor of the convention. So Republicans anyway are speaking with one voice. So those are the two measures that are hitting the ballot. I said that I would talk about other stuff if we have time, but I'm now bumping up on 50 minutes of me blabbing along. If there's another topic that somebody wants me to hit, I'm happy to hit it real quick. You'd have to be quick on your fingers, but if not, what I am going to do is remind you that I did just post up a bunch more on this housing bond. Earlier in the week, I posted up stuff on Save 13, and I very, very definitely want to draw your attention this morning to a piece I put up on the federal budget and the federal deficit, which is ballooning out of control. It's a bipartisan spending orgy going on in Washington, D.C., and it's really problematic. Maybe I'll use this as my favorite example of the quandary that we're in. Think of a family that has maxed out all of its credit cards. So a vast chunk of the family income every month is going just to pay the interests on the credit cards, right? So that's where America finds itself. Right now, this year, we will spend more money paying interest payments on a nearly $40 trillion national debt than we do on the entire Department of Defense for the United States government. And that pie is growing. It's expected by 2035 to be, I think, a quarter of the entire budget is just paying interest on the money that's borrowed. And so you'd think in a family, you would do things like say, okay, no more Xbox, no more optional things. We're gonna go frugal McDougal here, and we're gonna tighten our belts. We're gonna go full day Ramsey, and we're gonna get through this difficult time. Congress can't do that. And I get a lot of people who get annoyed at me when I bring up this example, but it'll be my closing example for this Substack Live, which is, I'm sure, like the rest of you, I was so kind of excited and thrilled at the Artemis expedition. They got to go out around the moon further than we've ever gone. I mean, the images looking back on the Earth were stunning. When the capsule came back down and the astronauts got out, I mean, it really made me feel proud to be an American. But I couldn't help but think about the fact that this entire enterprise, which was billions and billions of dollars, was borrowed on the national debt so that we could launch the Artemis around the moon. And we literally are going to have our grandchildren pay for it. So we're not paying for our Artemis to launch that we see. Our grandchildren are going to have to borrow from their grandchildren to borrow for the Artemis that they see. And at some point, you got to wake up and say, roads and highways, essential. Figuring out the proper safety net programs and how to manage Social Security and Medicare, which need reform. They're the drivers of the deficit, really. But at some level, some basic programs are necessary. Right? Going around the moon in an Artemis rocket, you ask yourself if that was necessary, if we had to do it, and would you have done it in your own family if you had to put the whole thing on your Amex or your Visa and pay it off at an 18% interest rate over how long? The interest rates aren't that bad. Anyways, that's what I got for you. I appreciate you participating. If you enjoyed this, later on this afternoon, it's going to show, I think it'll be this afternoon, it's going to show up on your feed as an actual video, and share it. Send it to people and say, hey, I watched this. I thought it was interesting. Check it out. And last but not least, I really, really appreciate you being part of this project, this hobby of mine that I've really enjoyed. And if you click those heart buttons one last time, it helps the Substack algorithm so that more people are attracted to this site and what we do. And there they are. It's a heart. It's the little button right down there in the corner. That's how you say thank you. And as opposed to Sadie, who actually said thank you. So thank you much. We'll post this online, and we'll be back tomorrow morning. Tune in for the top 10 winners and losers of the week in California politics. And of course, for the worst week in politics. Who was the winner? I know. You want to know. All right. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.